So we have learned that the DC shooter was part of a CIA-funded assassination team in Afghanistan. This video I'm doing a deep dive into that program because a lot more information has started to come out about these totally bonkers assassination programs where they would go in and kill every military-age male in a house, go to the next house, do the same thing. This was standard operating procedure for some of these special operations and CIA-backed forces in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's going to be a longer video. Please comment, subscribe, and share. From the New York Times, the Afghan refugee accused of shooting 2 National Guard members in Washington, D.C. fought in the late days of the U.S. war there as part of a Zero unit, a paramilitary force that worked with the CIA. The units were known for their brutality and labeled death squads by human rights groups. Okay, there's going to be so much conspiracy around this. I want to stick to the known facts and the obvious conclusions. So according to Rolling Stone magazine, there have been about 10,000 members of these CIA-backed, CIA-trained, CIA-funded Zero Group forces. Most of them were relocated to the U.S. in 2021 during our disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. And MAGA is going to blame Biden for letting these refugees in, and then the left is going to blame Trump for giving this guy asylum, for setting up that 2021 date. But who cares? It is our responsibility as a country. Our country spent 20 years in Afghanistan destroying that country. We all hold responsibility for what has happened to these people. Many were promised special immigrant visas for their service, but there are close to 4,500 living in the U.S. who are still waiting to secure legal status because of paperwork delays from the federal government.
The war effort in Afghanistan became about drone strikes and night raids. Well, night raids is just a euphemism for assassinations. Yes, if somebody comes out waving a white flag, well, he'll probably get shot anyway. But under certain circumstances, they will take people prisoner. But for the most part, you know, when they hit a target, every military-age man, as they say, on that target dies.
Whether or not he's guilty of a crime or even suspected of a crime.
Well, guilty of a crime, I mean, there's no accountability over this because it all depends upon the determinations of intelligence analysts in the Joint Special Operations Command and in the CIA.
And with the understanding and the context of the JSOC assassination program, you can understand what the CIA Zero Unit teams were doing. Zero units were like a scalpel pursuing terrorist targets at the highest level. They mainly operated at night. Their war was a series of high-stakes raids against targets making car and suicide bombs and terrorist leaders with bodyguards. It shouldn't surprise anybody that the CIA-backed paramilitary Zero force members have been implicated in war crimes because CIA-backed militias have been known to commit atrocities throughout history. The CIA-backed coup of Guatemala in 1954 led to 200,000 people killed and 40,000 people disappeared. The entire purpose of a CIA-led paramilitary is to create a layer of separation and deniability in order to protect the U.S. government from backlash against the atrocities committed at the behest of the U.S. government. It's from the New York Times. Razo Khan woke up suddenly to the sight of assault rifles pointed at his face and demands that he get out of bed and onto the floor. Within minutes, the armed raiders had separated the men from the women and the children. Then the shooting started. As Mr. Khan was driven away for questioning, he watched his home go up in flames. Within were the bodies of 2 of his brothers and of his sister-in-law, who was shot 3 times in the head. Villagers who rushed to the home found the burned body of her 3-year-old daughter in a corner of a torched bedroom. The men who raided the family's home that March night were members of an Afghan strike force trained and overseen by the Central Intelligence Agency in a parallel mission to the United States, but with looser rules of engagement. One of the most gruesome episodes examined by the Times was in Koyani district in the Nangarhar province. The forces handcuffed and hooded 2 brothers, and after a brief interrogation, as their wives and children watched, both men were dragged away and executed in a corner of the bedroom that was then detonated over their heads. At a September news conference in the city of Jalalabad, elders from 3 districts said that over 100 civilians were killed by the 02 unit in the month before. These aren't isolated incidents. It's pretty clear from the reporting that extrajudicial executions was the standard standard operating procedure for these Zero Force units. From ProPublica, Makhzala watched as the gunman questioned her 28 and 20-year-old son before roughly pinning them against a courtyard wall. Then, ignoring their frantic protests of innocence, the masked men put guns to the backs of her son's heads. One shot, two, then a third. Her youngest, the quiet, gentle one, was still alive after the first bullet, so they shot him again. Makhzala's neighbors had pressed me to meet her. I was a foreigner. I must be able to help. The neighbors believed that it was the work of the feared Zero units, squads of U.S.-trained Afghan Special Forces soldiers. My reporting showed that even the raids that did end in the capture of killing known militants frequently also involved civilian casualties. Far too often, I found the Zero unit soldiers acted on flawed intelligence and mowed down men, women, and children, some as young as 2, who had no discernible connection to terrorist groups. And the U.S. responsibility for the Zero unit operations is quietly muddled because of a legal carve-out that allows the CIA and any U.S. soldiers linked to the agency to act without the same oversight as the American military. I wrote about this all on my Substack. You can find more stories there. There are quite literally hundreds of these stories, and those are only the stories that have made it to Western media. So this was systematic. This was standard operating procedure. These Zero unit forces, they just killed and executed military-aged men. That was their operating procedure, and they were trained, funded, and led by the CIA. And to bring it full circle, this is how ICE is being run in our country. Did you notice in those stories how the guys invading the houses were masked, how they would round up everybody, zip tie them, herd them together? The only step we're missing right now is people aren't being executed. Not yet. These Zero unit teams were CIA-backed teams that acted with impunity, without accountability, with anonymity in Afghanistan. That's what's happening with ICE now in the States. They assume every brown person is an illegal immigrant, and then they detain them first and they figure out their legal status later, just like the Zero Force members assumed that every military-aged male on a target was an enemy combatant and they would just summarily execute them. We've already killed 83 people in the Caribbean with these boat strikes merely on the accusation that they're running drugs. Miller, Trump, Vogt, Karp, all of these psychopaths in power, they would love to be able to torture, disappear, and assassinate their political opponents, assassinate people who speak out against them. That's what authoritarians do. And the shooting in DC was an inevitable consequence of how we conducted the war in Afghanistan. We used these Afghans for our own ends, and then we just dropped them. Many of the recruits were teenagers when they first joined the Zero Forces, and these Afghan soldiers saw more brutal combat than anyone in the U.S. Army. Yet they don't qualify for VA benefits, they don't qualify for healthcare, they don't qualify for disability. And of course, men who have suffered so much trauma are going to snap when their legal status runs out. Of course they're going to snap when they see other Afghani nationals be deported. Like Muhammad Ali Datfar, who worked for the US as a translator. He had settled in Colorado with 4 kids, gotten his CDL, and he was picked up in Indiana by ICE, and now he's facing deportation. And for these guys that helped the US, being sent to Afghanistan is a death sentence. The Taliban will execute them. This video is from April 23rd, 2025. Jamal Wali, another Afghan interpreter who had been relocated to the US, was killed during a traffic stop by police. Listen to the pain and the frustration in his voice.
When I was serving you, with you liars, with you people with American status.
I served as well, sir.
Yeah. So you brought me to you fucking people brought me to this goddamn country, and I'm dying every fucking single day, and I have 4 children, and we wholly survive because you're a fucking racist people.
Okay. Subject keeps reaching for his weapon.
No, I'm not. I'm not reaching.
Now you want to give me that?
Hey, don't you reach, dude. Fuck! Listen, American. Take it. I take this with you, okay? So no. Hey, don't you reach, dude. No.
Here's what led up to this incident. Despite Wali's service, he struggled financially and mentally after resettlement. He had been working with a private security company in the US. However, he found it increasingly difficult to cover basic living expenses, including utility bills and vehicle insurance. These financial pressures eventually led to the suspension of his driver's license. Yet, out of necessity, he continued driving to maintain his job. On the day of the incident, police attempted to stop him for a routine check, but he tried to flee, and then his vehicle ran out of fuel. This is when this shooting occurred. Wali felt stuck and trapped. He wasn't able to earn enough to feed his family in the US. yet he couldn't go back to Afghanistan because the country had been destroyed, and because of his work with US forces, he would be executed by the Taliban there. You can hear the pain and the frustration in his voice, and I can understand how that stress would drive someone to violence, especially men who have spent years in combat. There are over 10,000 members of the CIA Zero units in the States now. 10,000 members of a force that perform routine extrajudicial executions. 10,000 members of a force whose standard operating procedure was to kill every military-aged male on the target. We have 10,000 Afghan paramilitary members who are now seeing their legal status expire under the Trump regime, who are seeing fellow Afghan service members being detained by ICE. 10,000 combat-hardened veterans who the US government promised to take care of, and who are now left to fend for themselves in a country hostile to immigrants. From the Rolling Stones again, Andar and other Zero unit soldiers have arrived in America with only the clothes and whatever they could carry on their plane. Now this is talking about him meeting with a woman in charge of a nonprofit. They stepped out of the tent, and Andar confessed many of the soldiers were coming to him for help. A few weeks later, Bakshi's phone rang. That's the person in charge of the nonprofit. It was Andar. 3 families were in a suburban Maryland hotel with no food. Children were going hungry. Bakshi went to the supermarket and delivered a few days' worth of groceries. They tackled everything from providing food to hungry families, to helping with green card applications, to facilitating prosthetics for amputees. This article is from NBC. About 10 to 12,000 members of the Afghan clandestine force known as Zero units were evacuated from Afghanistan, but their 2-year work permits in the US are due to expire within days or weeks, and the veterans worry they will no longer be able to support their families. Without your help, we are trapped. Recently, there have been cases of suicide within our community, driven by the overwhelming sentiment of helplessness we feel as our requests for immigration assistance go ignored by the US government. Violent deaths of despair in this country are far too common. So what's the difference between the DC shooter and the Marine who shot up the Mormon church in Michigan, or the former Marine sniper and Iraq war vet who shot 8 people at a waterfront bar in North Carolina? Those Marines had access to VA medical care, disability pensions, they were legally allowed to work, they weren't under threat of being deported to a country where they'd almost certainly face execution. Think of how much more stress these Afghan refugees are under. Their work permits expired in 2023. They now face the threat of ICE detention, and Trump announced that the US is permanently pausing all immigration from Afghanistan and other third world nations, in quotes. So should we deport every single combat veteran in this country because clearly they are more inclined to violence than the rest of the population? Should we have banned every soldier from Iraq and Afghanistan from returning stateside? Or is it pretty obvious that these soldiers require our care and our support because of the violence that this country asked them to commit? So if that's obvious about US soldiers, why is it not so obvious about the Afghan allies we have brought over? Why is the rhetoric online immediately to deport them all? We destroyed their country. We asked them to help us. We are responsible for them as much as we are responsible for every traumatized US combat veteran. Okay, the answer isn't to deport these Afghans back so that they face execution. The answer is to not destabilize foreign nations, to not run CIA-backed assassination squads. The answer is to not dump these Afghans who fought alongside US forces here without the resources to survive. The answer isn't to strip them of their legal status. The amount of money ICE is spending on detention and deportation could be used to help all of these families survive. Maybe the DC shooter wouldn't have driven across the country to kill these National Guard troops if he'd just been provided a pension that he could use to feed his wife and 5 small children. But that's fascism for you. The billionaire class has decided that they would rather build a paramilitary police force to shoot the starving masses in the streets because it's more profitable for their companies to kill you than to feed you. We're just going to see an increase in these acts of violence because as people are pushed to the edge, as they have nothing left to lose, some of them are not going to choose to go out quietly, especially in a country that has such easy access to firearms. That's just the simple logic of it all. Thanks for watching. Please share. If you can afford it, please subscribe as a paid member on Substack.